Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pacific Day, the prelude to Pacific Night. I'm Ernie Bauer. I'm the Senior Advisor and the Director of the Pacific Partners Initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And it's a great honor to be here with you today and to be involved with the very fine people at the Embassy of New Zealand. Ambassador Moore, thank you for including us in Pacific Day this year. I think part of the effort in asking CSIS to team up with the embassy on Pacific Day was to try to add some substance to what's been one of the best parties in Washington for years, and that's appropriate. And we're going to hear why from the minister very shortly. Before we introduce the minister, I'd like to let you know that this event and the speech will be live webcast, with live streaming on video at csis.org. So tune in if you're out there in cyberspace. We'd welcome your questions virtually, and I'd like to start by asking Ambassador Moore to come and say a word to kick us off. Ambassador.
Well, honoured guests, it's my privilege to welcome you here for the second Pacific Day. The Pacific Day is now as important as the Pacific Night. This is your day, a Pacific Day. It's not a New Zealand Day. New Zealand is just the facilitator. We're honoured to serve and provide this common Pacific roof that can provide cover for us all as we work on the issues of substance that are important to us. To fellow and the ambassadors, permanent reps from New York, thank you for your leadership and cooperation. Apologies on behalf of Jim McClay, our UN rep, who's away on family business. Special thanks to our Pacific Dean. Welcome to Esther Brimmer. An apology from Kurt Campbell, who can't be here. As you know, Kurt is the best friend our part of the Pacific's ever had. He's the most senior person to swing through our region. And I'll never forget Kurt's face when he was explaining how he was in Tarawa and he asked about unexploded munitions. And some bloke jumped up, rushed out in the bush, came back and put an unexploded bomb on his desk. Good work, that fellow. Anyway, when our Minister McCulley heard about this, he swiftly moved to provide technical assistance and cash to assist in this project. And this is something we all must do. It's an enormous personal pleasure to have Murray McCulley here. Murray has a genuine love for the Pacific. It's in every Kiwi's DNA. But Murray has more than his share. Minister, you did a great job at the forum. You led and created a fresh platform for progress. You will soon be the first New Zealand minister to visit some of our cousins in the Northwest Pacific. This is not a small thing. These brothers and sisters of ours have had a special relationship with the US, and they have much to teach us. I told Kurt Campbell they are relatives, but we've not been in touch for about 500 years, so it's about time we did. And your mission up there will fold into that as we reunite some of our families together. Minister, what you've done and what you're doing already makes me proud to be a New Zealander and a Pacific Islander. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now let me invite the Honorable Hersey Kyoto, the Ambassador of Palau to the United States and the Dean of the Pacific Diplomatic Corps, to say a word before we begin. Ambassador.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Foreign Minister, Ambassador Moore, my colleagues from the UN, and my other colleagues here in Washington, D.C. On behalf of the Pacific Island ambassadors, I'd like to welcome everybody here not to get the welcome from the Ambassador Moore, but I would like to borrow some of his words and welcome you here to this great embassy of New Zealand. Today, you'll be hearing a lot of important issues concerning Pacific. I'm happy that I was able to convince the committee, the planning committee, to include some of the experts in climate change whom you will hear this afternoon. I'm not really looking forward, although I like to hear important issues concerning the Pacific. But honestly, I'm really here and looking forward for this evening festivities.
It's so specific.
And tonight, I don't want to, go forward, but tonight I just want to give you a brief that tonight we're going to be able to rub elbows with some of the most important people from the Pacific. This occasion has become one of the most important and most attended gala, if I may, in this area. I have been here for almost 15 years, and it has never ceased to amaze me how so many people and so many important people and many key players in Washington, D.C. attended this night. I'm so happy that this year we decided, or the committee decided, and really the honor goes to Ambassador Moore for putting together the afternoon tea and also the seminar. In the past, we didn't have seminars, we just have party, which I like, but we're so fortunate that so many key players and people who are knowledgeable in their field are going to be speaking this afternoon. So without taking so much time, I'd like to again welcome you to this beautiful embassy of New Zealand. I'm so happy that Ambassador Moore was so graciously offered to host this again this year. Thank you very much.
Well, it's now my pleasure to introduce the main act, Minister of Foreign Affairs of New Zealand, Murray McCully. To tell you quite honestly, this is a man who has put his personal heart and soul into focusing allies and friends, countries on the Pacific. He's logged, I don't know, how many miles was it? Ambassador Moore guessed something like 8 million miles or something like that, but I think Kurt Campbell was trying to challenge those numbers, but he was including all the Asia Pacific. But let me just say that early on in his tenure, the minister came to Washington. He talked not just about the U.S.-New Zealand relationship, which has seen a great leap forward under his tenure, but he talked about the importance of the Pacific right up front, very directly, and we hope to hear more about that today. He's done a great turn for us in the United States in focusing our focus on the region. I think you're all aware that the White House and the State Department and the U.S. administration is refocusing on the region, and that's due to friends like Minister McCully. So let me ask you to join me in welcoming him here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie Bauer of the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, and thank you for the partnership that you have delivered with New Zealand. Can I acknowledge our important guests today, especially the Assistant Secretary of State, Esther Brimmer, the many ambassadors who are gathered here today, including some from New York. And in particular, can I acknowledge New Zealand's ambassador to Washington, Mike Moore, who has been the architect of Pacific Day, as he has been the architect of so many things over his vigorous career. Mike and I started political life, as adversaries over 40 years ago. And things have got a little less adversarial since I asked him to come to Washington. But we've known each other a long time. We're good friends, and I'm a great admirer of the energy that he uniquely brings to the relationship between New Zealand and the United States, and the way he has incorporated the Pacific component into that relationship. His work today is something we should all be very grateful for, and I want to put my appreciation on record here today. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, because ties between the United States and the Pacific region go back as far as there's been a United States of America. It seems appropriate that we should acknowledge this role today, as we note that 70 years ago, the first American troops landed in the South Pacific as part of the long, hard campaign against Japan that was fought in World War II. On the 12th of June 1942, 5 American transport ships, a cruiser and a destroyer, sailed into Auckland Harbour. One of the advance guard gave the following piece of news to his compatriots as they set foot on New Zealand shores for the first time, and I quote, "No Scotch, 2% beer, but nice folks." Some things thankfully change with time, others I hope do not. For the following 2 years, at any point in time, between 15,000 and 45,000 American servicemen and women were stationed in New Zealand, a place described in their guidebook as deep in the heart of the South Pacific. Over the next 3 years, the fates of the South Pacific and the United States of America were inextricably linked. More than 2 million American soldiers, including a future US President Kennedy, passed through Henderson Field in the Solomon Islands. Battles were fought and won by servicemen from the United States, Australia and New Zealand, and reinforced by soldiers from right across the Pacific. What gave the encounter a special quality was that the New Zealand and American societies of the day were similar enough to communicate easily, but sufficiently different to find each other quite intriguing. Both, of course, were former British colonies with a frontier past. Both believed in democracy, freedom and the protection of civil liberties, and both shared a Pacific coastline. Well, I'm pleased to be able to tell you today that over the coming weeks, the American contribution to New Zealand's World War II security will be the subject of special commemoration. For 3 weeks from the 14th of June this year, 50 Marines and a 50-person Marine band will be in New Zealand on the invitation of our government for a series of commemorative events. New Zealanders will express their gratitude for the US presence 70 years ago, delivering a security for our country that we could not deliver for ourselves. Today, our friendship continues to grow. It's a friendship based on a common set of interests and common set of values. It's a friendship demonstrated by the support we give each other when times are tough. I recall the immediate response and assistance from the United States, from the government and people here following the Christchurch earthquake, and the outpouring of sympathy from so many Americans. Direct calls to our Prime Minister from President Obama in the middle of the night on the day it happened, a call from Secretary Clinton to myself, and the enormous generosity of the American people for the Christchurch appeal led here by Ambassador Moore and by Peter Watson. 18 months ago, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and I signed the Wellington Declaration, a document that commits the United States and New Zealand to a new strategic partnership. Fundamental to this partnership is an enhanced political dialogue, and a key element in this dialogue is increasingly regular engagement on Pacific issues, as well as annual Pacific consultations. Prime Minister Key and President Obama met here in Washington last year for a wide-ranging discussion. They discussed our mutual interest in promoting a more effective trade regime among the Asia-Pacific nations through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. With the experience of the Christchurch earthquake fresh in mind, They discussed enhanced cooperation around disaster response. And they discussed our security cooperation and New Zealand's contribution in Afghanistan. New Zealand, of course, is not unique in the Pacific region in providing support for the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. Our troops serve there with soldiers from Australia and from Tonga. We recently welcomed to New Zealand the US Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. We identified ways to work together on border security, cyber security, counter-terrorism and people trafficking, issues that are critical to New Zealand's and indeed the Pacific's security. New Zealand's relationship with the United States is invigorated through our dialogue, but it is measured through our actions. Through the Wellington Declaration, we are translating our common interests and values into practical outcomes. Perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in the Pacific. Over the last 18 months, New Zealand and the United States have cooperated on a range of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief activities. New Zealand contributed over 100 engineers and medical personnel to the US-led Pacific Partnership in 2011. Tokelau's water shortages in late 2011 were alleviated through a fully integrated New Zealand and United States disaster response operation. Our two countries have joined forces to fight illegal fishing in the Pacific through sub-regional and regional maritime surveillance activities. Operation Kurukuru in late 2011 was the largest surveillance operation ever conducted in the Pacific region, involving the sighting of over 400 vessels, the boarding of 80, and the apprehension of 8. We are working closely with one another to identify joint initiatives to address non-communicable diseases in the Pacific. We recently collaborated on a Pacific agribusiness initiative and will be co-funding a waste disposal initiative in Kiribati. We welcome a noticeable increase in the level of engagement by the United States in the Pacific region. Can I echo the sentiments of the Ambassador about the personal drive and enthusiasm by Dr. Kurt Campbell, who has been the champion of US engagement in that sense. His work is greatly admired in our country. All of this makes sense as the global geopolitical and economic balance shifts to the Asia-Pacific region. The US, of course, has a special relationship with its Pacific territories, American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Marianas, and with the freely associated states of Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. American military stationed in Guam and the Fifth Fleet in Hawaii provides a welcome security presence in our region. And let's not forget that the current US president was born in the Pacific island of Hawaii, the 50th American state. The State Department, the Department of Defense, and the Department of the Interior, these and other branches of the US government, have all worked hard to give greater attention to the issues affecting the Pacific region. US Aid, for example, opened its Pacific Island Regional Office in Port Moresby last October, bringing its considerable expertise to the wider region. And it is, as we understand it, already making a significant impact within the region. New Zealand's delighted to see increasing levels of interaction between the United States and Pacific Island countries across a broad range of political, economic, and developmental issues. There was a 50-strong delegation from the United States led by US Deputy Secretary of State Thomas Nides in attendance at the 40th anniversary of the Pacific Forum in Auckland last September. One outcome of the forum was that American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Marianas Islands were all for the first time designated as observers. Expanding the forum in this way can only reinforce the ties of friendship, of Pacific diversity, and of collective responsibility to secure a prosperous future. New Zealand, ladies and gentlemen, is proud to be a Pacific nation. Immigration from the Pacific has shaped and defined our national identity. Just as the Pacific is embedded in the culture and in New Zealand culture and society, New Zealand in turn is committed to the future of the Pacific. The region has got a lot going for it. In particular, it has young, vibrant people, it has diverse cultures, and it's got a vast array of natural assets, vast fish and marine resources, minerals and oil, and renewable energy resources as well. I do not, though, wish to paint a picture of a Pacific postcard oasis. To be sure, there are many places in the region that are amongst the most beautiful in the world, but there are great difficulties in using the physical resources of the Pacific in ways that ensure sustainability, protect the land and sea, and return revenues to the local people. Climate change is a major threat to many Pacific Island countries, particularly those with lower-lying atolls. Those seeking to develop export industries must overcome the tyranny of distance, lack of access to capital, and quarantine restrictions in other countries. Tourism development is thwarted by lack of international and local transport and by lack of investment in local infrastructure. Human potential is challenged by a lack of educational opportunities. A dependence on electricity generated by imported diesel has a crippling effect on Pacific economies, not to mention the climate change impact. There are also many security challenges. The Pacific is not immune to the attention of global criminal syndicates. The threats of the drug trade, illegal fishing, and human trafficking are all prevalent. And of course, there have at times been internal security challenges for several states, including military coups, riots, and ethnic unrest in various places. Having said that, I don't want to paint a bleak picture of the Pacific either. It is positive that the region itself is finding solutions for these challenges. A key player in this respect is the regional body, the Pacific Islands Forum, of which New Zealand has the honour currently to serve as chair. Late last year, as host of the Forum Leaders Meeting in Auckland, New Zealand had the opportunity to provide its view of the region, its challenges and its opportunities. It was an optimistic, glass-half-full picture of the region that was profiled in Auckland, one that highlighted the genuine assets the region holds in fisheries, agriculture and horticulture, and in tourism. And there was a strong focus on the enablers that will unlock the potential in those sectors: improved regional fisheries management, efforts to overcome biosecurity and similar obstacles to agricultural exports, the availability of reasonably priced renewable energy, better infrastructure, and of course higher educational standards. I do not have time to discuss all of these today, but I want to comment in passing on two of them. The Pacific is now the only healthy tuna fishery on Earth not yet seriously overfished. For many of our poorest neighbours, their exclusive economic zone is their largest economic asset. Kiribati is a good example, arguably the poorest of our neighbours, but the owner of an EEZ of 3.55 million square kilometres. The challenge is to ensure that a fair share of the value of that resource passes to the hands of its owners, both in cash and employment opportunities. That is one of our priorities as chair of the forum this year. Another big priority is renewable energy. Judging by the number of lofty words spoken at climate change conferences over the past decade, you could be excused for imagining that the Pacific, endowed as it is with good sunshine, must be positively riddled with solar power plants. The reality is that little has been done to translate lofty words into action on the ground. For this reason, I've made it a priority for our year in the Forum Chair to get some runs on the board in relation to renewable energy. In July, I'll be visiting Tonga for the opening of the 1.5 megawatt plant that will make a significant contribution towards the power requirements of the Tongan capital. I think the peak load is about 8 megawatts, so we'll see about 20% of the peak load from that one initiative. During the course of this calendar year, we will move our small remote neighbour of Tokelau from 100% dependence on fossil fuels to over 90% dependence on renewable solar energy. I'm just going to repeat that. We're going to move from 100% dependence on fossil fuels to over 90% dependence on solar energy in the Tokelau Islands by the end of calendar 2012. And we have a range of other renewable energy projects underway around the region. This approach is, I hope, symbolic of the role that New Zealand can play within the region. We are a small country. Our development budget is not huge, but well over half of that development budget is committed to the region. And we try to be focused and committed to actually get things done. That is what is required if we're going to tip the balance within our region. The gap between maximising our opportunities and succumbing to our challenges is not that large. But I remain a strong advocate for the positive view of the region and its future that was presented by New Zealand during last year's Forum Leaders meeting. Both development and diplomatic arms of the New Zealand government are firmly focused on delivering that promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Now could I call on Dr. Esther Brimmer, the Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations, to deliver a response to the Minister's comments. Esther?
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Foreign Minister McCulley, other members of the Diplomatic Corps, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, let me begin by thanking you for this chance to participate in the 2012 Pacific Day event. From its start nearly 20 years ago, this event has grown into an excellent forum for celebrating our shared history and heritage as Pacific nations. On behalf of the United States, I welcome the chance to continue our strong ties with the many nations of the Pacific region. Over the past few months, President Obama, as you note, our first Pacific president, and Secretary Clinton have sought to reinforce the enduring American commitment to advance security, prosperity, and human dignity across the Pacific region. There should be no doubt that the United States is itself a Pacific nation. Starting in its earliest days, this administration has prioritized U.S. relations with the Pacific. From the President's personal commitment to strong engagement with the Asia-Pacific region, to the Secretary's decision to break precedent and make her first foreign trip to Asia. And U.S. engagement with the Pacific region has only grown over the past 3 years, as I'll highlight in just a moment. But as Foreign Minister McCulley has already noted, your remarks were right on point in noting that this American commitment to security, development, values, and economic growth of the Pacific is not new. The Obama administration has embraced that commitment and strengthened it, but it did not begin in 2009. Since the 19th century, the United States has been a Pacific nation, and we are proud to share this heritage with so many countries who also share our commitment to strong democratic values, steady improvement of our common welfare, and a vision of a safe, secure, and peaceful world. Nor will America's commitment to the Pacific and the nations of the Pacific end anytime soon. Looking to the future, Secretary Clinton has referred to the 21st century as America's Pacific century. We recognize that just as the past decade has been spent responding to threats, the next decade must be spent pursuing opportunities, especially to our west. To that end, we have pledged continued robust U.S. outreach and partnership to the Pacific region. The United States is ready to engage with our Pacific partners on a host of shared opportunities and challenges. Indeed, the Obama administration has put the notion of global interconnectedness at the heart of U.S. foreign policy. We recognize that more than ever before, the United States economy and our national security are intertwined with the rest of the world, especially with the Asia-Pacific region. Frankly, there just isn't much that doesn't cross borders anymore. At their best, these trans-border connections can be incredible forces for good. Just look at the past year. Look at the impact of the free flow of information has had on remarkable changes in North Africa and the Middle East, where decades of misrule have been thrown off by citizens demanding respect for fundamental rights. Yet, our keen global interconnectedness also means that our most pressing challenges no longer stop at borders. These days, our primary concern is no longer two nations fighting over a single line on a map. Instead, we are increasingly focused on complex transnational challenges that don't respect borders. Border fights have been replaced by more complex challenges: nuclear proliferation issues, climate change, attacks on freedom and human rights, transnational crime, man-made and natural disasters, terrorism, pandemic disease, environmental degradation, and devastation. So even as global power has become more diffuse, so too are the challenges we would face. And just as those challenges and threats are shared, so we recognize that the most effective solution is a shared response. For the United States, this reality only strengthens our long-term commitment to multilateral engagement, both across the United Nations and with a number of regional organizations. So our nations in this region have partnered closely on a number of important issues across the United Nations system. We have defended our shared values and commitment to universal human rights by calling to account persistent violators like Iran, North Korea, and Syria. We have pushed for an end to the Syrian government's wanton attacks on civilians and demanded that Iran cease its nuclear program and support for terrorism. But we are also working together to enhance human well-being. We are collaborating in the fight against non-communicable diseases like cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes, which rapidly have become the preeminent health challenge to nations across the globe, killing more than 35 million people annually, 80% of whom live in developing countries. And as you know, Pacific nations have been hit especially hard. We welcome the chance to work with you and others to support the United Nations General Assembly's focus last year on non-communicable diseases and the high-level event that raised the profile of this issue significantly. And the United States is supporting international efforts to turn that high-level political support that we saw in New York last September into concrete global action, including backing efforts by the World Health Organization to complete, by the end of this year, a global monitoring framework on non-communicable diseases, including indicators and targets. And this very week, in Geneva, we are discussing next steps on NCDs at the World Health Assembly. We're also working together with Pacific nations and other partners in the lead up to the Rio Plus 20 summit on sustainable development, an important priority for all of us. But it's not only by working together across the UN system that the United States has sought to support our shared goals with our Pacific neighbors. Pacific and Asian regional institutions are important to the United States as well. They provide mechanisms for mustering collective action and help improve global standards as well. So in 2011, we sent our largest and highest level delegation to Auckland, as the minister has already noted, to the Pacific Island Forum led by Deputy Secretary of State Thomas Nides. And we look forward to participating in the Pacific Island Forum dialogue in the Cook Islands later this year. Not only is the PIF a key forum for regional cooperation, it also provides an opportunity for us all to engage on issues of concern to the Pacific and the global community. We are pleased that the forum has designated American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands as observers. Other Pacific and Asian regional institutions are important to the United States as well. We just finished our year hosting the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, working to spur long-term economic growth that will help ensure all citizens of the Asia-Pacific region have strong economic opportunities. After hosting other APEC heads of state in Hawaii last year, President Obama went on to Indonesia, where he was the first American head of state to participate in the East Asia Summit. Additionally, it was during this administration that the United States became the first non-member of ASEAN to open a dedicated mission to that organization and to accredit a resident ambassador. In addition to these partnerships in the United Nations and regional bodies, the United States has provided steadfast bilateral support to a number of Pacific countries as we work together to take on many of the transnational issues I mentioned earlier. For example, on the critical challenge of climate change, the United States has provided tens of millions of dollars in assistance to explore viable mitigation and adaptation options. Our Pacific Adaptation to Climate Change program helps improve monitoring and forecasting services throughout the South Pacific to enhance food security for farmers in Fiji, Kiribati, Samoa, the Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Vanuatu, to promote healthy ecosystems in the Solomon Islands, and to improve access to water in Vanuatu. Our Coral Triangle Initiative Support Program helps build capacity to sustain fisheries and manage marine sanctuaries. We look forward to working with the Pacific region on the implementation of the Durban Platform of Enhanced Action and agree with those of you who favor a negotiated rather than a judicial approach to undertaking appropriate climate change commitments. We also provide tens of millions of dollars annually to enhance security for our Pacific partners against a range of transnational threats. To combat piracy, trafficking in persons, illegal fishing, and other forms of cross-border crime, the Coast Guard extends the reach of partner nation law enforcement officers. To date, we've worked with partners from the Cook Islands, Kiribati, the Marshall Islands, Palau, Micronesia, Nauru, Tonga, and Tuvalu. And we've provided 14 Pacific Island countries with training and technical assistance to combat money laundering. In closing, let me add simply that given our many shared interests, challenges, and solutions between our nations, I'm always pleased to represent the United States at meetings and gatherings with our Pacific partners. I'm delighted I will have a chance to be part of the U.S. delegation to the Pacific Island Forum this year, where I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther. Let me now invite Minister McCulley to take the podium to answer questions. I'd like to just ask you, please identify yourself and your organization, and let's focus on questions rather than statements, if we could. Minister, please. First question. Ambassador.
Thank you, Chairman. Minister, let me first congratulate New Zealand on winning the International Sevens in London last week.
I hoped rugby would come.
Fiji had hoped to be able to take that. We were overtaken at the, no, we weren't overtaken, but we were pipped by a better team on the day, so congratulations. Minister, as very closely involved, I know this is a parochial question from me, but New Zealand, yourself, have been closely involved in both the CMAC, the Ministerial Contact Group of the Forum, and the Commonwealth Ministers Action Group in respect of the situation in Fiji. Because the Fiji events have had a ripple effect right through the island Pacific anyway, it is an issue, I think, that needs to be talked about. Sometimes it's not a subject that is very popular to be talked, but because of your close involvement and because events...
Kiwi plot. Kiwi plot.
Because of your close involvement and the interest of others, and it's a subject that doesn't get talked about very often, and the events in Fiji are moving in a positive direction, I would appreciate your comments and views on where this is going, because it seems to us, some of us anyway, that New Zealand and Australia have been unduly reluctant to assist the process of moving forward to the elections in 2014, although immediately recent events have changed this, and I hope this will continue for the future. Perhaps your comments on that, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And firstly, can I say that in addition to the foreign affairs portfolio, I hold one other portfolio in New Zealand, which is that of Minister of Sport. And so I accept your congratulations and take full credit for the New Zealand Sevens team. Thank you for asking that question. I think, let me just say a few things very briefly. First of all, I think it's important that the forum, which not only makes its own rules and enforces them, but also tends to act as a guide for the Commonwealth and the UN and many other bodies, sets the bar in the right place when it comes to the protection of civil liberties, human rights, democracy, the rule of law. And so I'm one of those who supports the decisions that were made in response to the military coup, but I also take the point that once there's a point where you have to find a way forward. So I think that if sanctions are threatened, if events of a negative type are potentially going to occur, it's important to follow through and put those in place. But then you do have to find a way forward. And in recent weeks, I've led a ministerial contact group from the forum in a visit to Suva. That follows a fairly lengthy period of exchanges. I should say, for those who imagine, and I see this written from time to time, that perhaps we should engage more. I don't think there's been too many weeks when I haven't been engaged in one way or another with Fiji. I enjoy a very good working relationship, a very professional relationship with my Fijian counterpart, who I regard as a good man, who I work with very effectively. And I was very pleased that we were able to take the forum group into these discussions. We were briefed thoroughly on the work that is going into the preparation for elections, and there is now real substance around those preparations. We've got a voter registration process underway. There's a dialogue process under which the new constitution will be formed for elections to be held. And the group that I led made what I thought was a very fair assessment of the situation on the ground, and made the statement that if the public consultations about to commence could take place in an environment where there was respect for the freedom of the media, where there was freedom for people to assemble and freedom of speech, then we would be disposed to recommend to our leaders, because they are the ultimate decision makers here, that we should start a progressive process of responding to those initiatives. I've indicated that I'll be back at some stage in the next few weeks, and then hopefully lead the forum ministerial contact group back to Suva again before the forum leaders meet in the last week of August of this year, so that we can give them an up-to-date report on those matters. I think it's very important that the regional group gives credit for the steps that are taking place in a positive direction, identifies the concerns that we still have around freedom of assembly and so on, but responds to those too if they are met during this very important consultation period. I think the question that is in everyone's minds is, will the elections in 2014 be free and fair? And I think if the consultations over the next few weeks can take place in an environment where there is, as I say, respect for people's right to assemble, respect for people's right to speak freely, and respect for the ability of the media to report freely, then we should see that as a reasonable proxy for elections being free and fair when they're held. So I want us to be fair-minded. I want us to give credit where it's due. I want us to identify those benchmarks going forward, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to, over these next couple of visits, make some further progress to build on that we've achieved to date.
Minister, please. Thank you. Next question, please.
Hello, I'm Franco Chamakili from the Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum. And in regards to security, some scientists give low-lying island countries 50 more years of habitability. And I'm wondering what type of contingency plans are being made for those populations, specifically in Tokelau, Tuvalu, or even Kiribati, specifically how Kiribati bought or wanted to buy some land in Fiji. if you could maybe speak to some of the real plans that are being discussed.
Yeah, look, I see a good deal written about that topic. I have a more positive view if we do the right things moving forward. I understand that there is a transaction which will see a significant amount of land in Fiji purchased by the government of Kiribati, but I've also seen it reported that the President has asserted this is an investment, not a climate change contingency. I sincerely hope that we're right about being positive in relation to Kiribati, because we are embarked on spending about $13 million of New Zealand taxpayers' money there this year, based on the optimistic assumption that they'll still be in business for some time. I think what it is fair to say is that in Kiribati in particular, we've seen the biggest humanitarian challenges within our region. I've been there a couple of times. I'm going again reasonably soon, and I took a delegation of members of Parliament there a couple of years ago. And I don't any of us could say that we felt proud to be in a region where people were living under the very difficult circumstances that you see on Tarawa. So we've decided to step up to the plate, and we've challenged other donors like the World Bank and the ADB to work with us. There's now a very dramatic program being put in place, everything from improved sanitation, new subdivision there for accommodation. There's a solid waste plant in which we're now in partnership with USAID, which I'm delighted to see happening given our shared involvement there during the Second World War. We've got a host of other projects underway on things like the resealing of runways and the sealing of roads. So we're working on the basis that we need to prepare for people being there for the future. We are not holding back on making decisions that will lift the humanitarian bar there, simply because there are some who have a more gloomy forecast for the future. In relation to Tokelau, there are probably about 6,000 to 7,000 Tokelauans living in New Zealand. They are New Zealand citizens. They have the right to come and live in New Zealand. There are about 1,500 remaining in Tokelau, and I have a strong sense that you'll still see that Tokelau community working well, that we're climate proofing everything we do. New schools and hospitals following the cyclone are all being built to provide those aspects. So we are not using negative forecasts as a basis for delaying action in these places. As I've already said to you, we're moving on things like renewable energy in these places, and I think that that's the approach that we must, as a community, take.
Time for one more question. Okay, I'd like to use the prerogative of the chair to ask the question. Minister, we've talked this morning or this afternoon, sorry. I just got back from Manila, so it's this morning to me. But we haven't really mentioned China. I wondered if you could say a word about China's role in the Pacific. How do we use regional architectures, if we do indeed, to build cooperation, a pattern of cooperation and partnership with China? And is the Pacific an opportunity in that sense, or is it a challenge?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, can I say I admire the restraint of the employees of the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade who are present, who declined the opportunity to ask a question. It's budget day in New Zealand tomorrow. It's well known that there have been some economies sought on the MFAT budget, and I just want to thank them for their restraint and professionalism in not asking any questions.
It's not over.
I think the role that China has emerging in the Pacific is a truly important one. They're a very substantial presence within the Pacific. China has more diplomats in the Pacific than New Zealand and Australia combined, and that despite the fact that they have diplomatic relations with only 8 of the 14 countries. 6, of course, recognise Taiwan. So it's a significant diplomatic presence. They have a significant financial presence, in early days very much in the form of soft loans, which is, and I do not target this comment directly just at China. I think it's a feature of other donors as well, that we've tended to favour soft loans as a technique, and I think moving increasingly to grants is to be preferred. But there is a significant Chinese financial presence within the region. And New Zealand takes the view that we want to work closely with China and ensure that, as was spelt out at the Cairns Compact when the forum leaders met in Cairns a couple of years ago, that we have transparency and cooperation amongst donors. And it's fair to say that the spirit of donor partnership is something that is a strong aspiration for New Zealand as far as China is concerned. We've had a free trade agreement between New Zealand and China for over 3 years now. It's been a very substantial benefit to the New Zealand economy, and in fact it's cushioned us through some of the worst of the global financial crisis. We are, with that link in trade and in terms of economic partnership, developing the relationship in many other aspects as well. And I add to the list cooperation in the Pacific in the development space. And I've made it clear publicly that my aspiration is to be part of the first partnership that anyone manages to create with China, doing development work within the Pacific. I think that that is the way for us to respond to China's growing presence in the region, to form partnerships to ensure that we promote good targets in terms of the way in which we go about our development work within the region. And the responses that we've had to date have been very encouraging, so we'll keep working on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Minister, let me thank you and Secretary Bremer for your comments. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the great things about coming to the New Zealand Embassy is their wonderful hospitality. I hope you'll enjoy that starting now for a 10-minute coffee break. I think the coffee break is it just here? In the gallery and on the patio? Well, maybe not on the patio. Very Pacific weather we're having here.
Get out the side doors.
In the ramp here. So thank you again, and please join me in thanking our speakers this afternoon.